Whedon cut, Snyder cut, does it really matter? Justice League, the movie. After the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, after The Watchmen, by the late 80s, I started reading quite a few DC comic books, though I always was more of a Marvel fan. As the Marvel Cinematic Universe was getting a little bit politically iffy, ideologically iffy already, Justice League appearing was something I was very hyped up about. Now, I've said a number of times, I don't like the fact that everything post-Watchmen tried to make everything dark and gritty. I didn't think Man of Steel was particularly well done. Batman versus Superman, The Dawn of Justice, I mean, it had its flaws, but overall, if you're going to do that storyline and it's got to be dark, I actually kind of liked it. Justice League came out and I was excited to have a Justice League movie, and I liked it at first. I don't know how to go into this. There's enough good stuff in Justice League, the movie, that it was entertaining. And I did like the cinematic release. That was the one that I saw. That was the one that I watched digitally a number of times. The one that I appreciated a lot of the dialogue and the lines, especially our villain. The scenes were memorable. They opened and closed strong. Again, the dialogue was strong. The movie kind of popped. It went from scene to scene, despite the fact that the plot ultimately didn't make any sense, despite the fact that the villain's behavior doesn't ultimately make any sense, despite all of the weird problems that go on. It was an entertaining and enjoyable movie. As a fan of The Flash, I did not like what they did with Ezra Miller's Flash. I don't know if it's him, the way it's written. The idea that the Flash, because of his superhuman speed, might actually suffer from or manifest as having attention deficit disorder might be a relatively interesting one, but it really made him annoying, especially for those of us used to the comic book, and worse yet, used to the TV show that was still being watched by a couple of people in that era. Gal Gadot is a very lovely woman who looks like Wonder Woman. She's very fit, and she does a good enough job in the role, but she is not a great actress. When you look at any of her dramatic moments, she really fizzles. You don't get a better Aquaman for cinema than what you've gotten with Jason Momoa. I personally think if I had to pick, Ben Affleck is probably my favorite Batman. Although I love the Batman Begins and that dark trilogy, gave us the whole origin story, especially with Begins. Ben Affleck really did a good job as the older, mature Batman, though admittedly, I'm not a huge Batman fan. Henry Cavill, you can't say enough about how he looks the part of Superman and has so much potential in that role. And I say potential because Man of Steel suffered from a terrible script. He did fine enough in Batman versus Superman, but then in Justice League, it really is the epic history of lost opportunities, missed opportunities, lost chances. The whole argument about the Snyder cut was interesting. I really leaned towards Snyder because Watchmen is maybe my favorite movie of all time. Whatever perfect storm brought that miracle together, it works, and I think it's magnificent. When compared to the comic, to the source material, I've talked about that enough elsewhere. But the Snyder cut turned out to be twice as long of nothing. Honestly, it felt like watching 2 extra hours worth of cut footage from a YouTube channel. It was all unnecessary, cluttered stuff. All of it was sort of the extra footage we got. A lot of it was weird. A lot of it was people running up and down stairs. A lot of it was the weird thing with the Flash and Iris. That was weird. And there's a number of things unexplainable about that encounter. And anyway, by the end of watching Zack Snyder's cut, I did a little quick reaction video for my channel. I went ahead and I actually deleted it a while back because I kind of started out being like, I sat through it and it had all this entertaining stuff in it, but then, there was this and then there was that. And by the end of the video, I was kind of like, well, I guess I'll probably watch it again in the future, but the Whedon one will be my go-to one. And now I've had all this time, well over a year, to be thinking about it. I'm like, the fundamental problem with Justice League was neither the Whedon cut nor the Snyder cut. In fact, for all of the personal failings of these people as humans, because that's out there, I don't think either of them are anybody to be held up as role models. I did like the Whedon cut better, but it's clear that Whedon was trying to fix certain things that Snyder just left in and expanded. And the real problem ends up being the script to begin with. The story you start with has so many flaws and holes. Darkseid, Steppenwolf, anyone affiliated with Darkseid, that they don't know where it was that they were finally defeated. They don't know where it was there where they had glimpsed the anti-life equation once upon a time. They don't know where the 3 mother boxes were left. They discover them on Earth. They only discover them after Superman died. His scream awakens them in the Snyder cut. But they had been on Earth for millennia before Superman arrived. Why in the heck does that matter? The Whedon cut made it the overwhelming feeling of fear woke them. Personally, that's pretty stupid, but it is a better answer. Because now, having met aliens from space, having met Superman, having the Zod and the Kryptonian attack and all of that mess, but now Superman's dead, the only one that saved us from that, now you're suddenly a small world in a big universe that might be hostile, and that level of fear, there's at least a rationale to that. And in a dozen other places that I won't go into, people have delved into it much more in depth than I could ever. If you go find Mahler's channel, you look up Mahler, I think he spent just over 2 hours analyzing the full 4-hour Snyder cut and all of the flaws and errors and problems. And there's a number of them. There's a number of them with the way that Wonder Woman does not emote, the way that Batman is free and loose with his secret identity. He basically wanders around an Icelandic village, tells it to Barry Allen, having just met him. All of these sort of things that don't add up, that don't make sense. The villains, how they didn't know, why are they here now? What is the motivation? I mean, this is not nitpicking over minor details. This is actually the underlying narrative is so nonsensical and does not follow. It is so non sequitur that it becomes, this is why there's problems with it. This is why neither the Whedon cut nor the Snyder cut fully satisfies, in my opinion. Because until you change that script, until you junk that movie and start again, you do things like eliminate Cyborg. I don't know why we needed him. Sure, he was an important character in comic books, but he wasn't even a member of the original League. And you left out Green Lantern, who was still floating around out there from his own movie franchise. Oh, there's a glimpse of a Green Lantern in a couple of flashbacks. So overall, the whole narrative kind of needed to be scrapped. The conflict, what brought Darkseid to Earth, what brings these heroes together, which heroes we're going to have appear, all of this can be repaired only by getting to the fundamental storyline of the script and tearing it up and starting over again and working towards a coherent story. In hindsight, having all this time to think about it and having watched it a few more times, it really is, it's the first one I remember that suffered the narrative problems that now all the new woke TV shows do, whether it's Star Trek or the Disney ones, the Disney Star Wars, Disney Marvel. All of these newer shows are having the same narrative problem. They're not written to be consistent with any canon. They're not consistent within themselves. It's like a committee of people checking boxes or making it up as they go. And so it's clunky and it kind of drifts from scene to scene. And it doesn't really tell you a cohesive story that makes any kind of sense whatsoever. It's really noticeable in the Disney Star Wars trilogy and now their shows, all of the Marvel this phase, all of the shows that are coming out on Disney. The Star Treks that I don't bother to watch anymore are horrible for this. But when you're winging it and making it up as you go without a beginning, middle, and end point in your narrative around which to build dialogue and story, you end up with this complete irrational mess. And now I realize this Justice League is one of the first ones that did that and presented that so well. That original theatrical release, though Whedon clearly had enough narrative sense to try to tweak some of those problems, he sort of stuck with this script that is like this. It's clunky, it doesn't make sense, and you end up drifting from scene to scene. And as I say, in that version of it, you get all of the great lines from that movie that I thought were memorable within dialogue are in the Whedon cut. The Snyder cut, again, feeling like it's patched together out of the cut pieces from YouTube. There's not a lot, the dialogue just sort of, people say a few things and then they're like, are we done here? We get Martian Manhunter done in this weird, bizarre way where he does not appear at the climax to be part of the story, but he shows up after the fact to just let Bruce Wayne know that he's going to take a bigger role. And Ben Affleck literally looks tired and or bored or hungover when he meets Martian Man. Like, oh yeah, okay, all right. I mean, it's truly pathetic. The scenes pass from scene to scene in this willy-nilly sort of way that feels like a really bad done high school production. The Whedon cut, at least you have these great lines delivered by the bad guy. You have this interchange where the scenes open and close with a pop. But again, when you step back from it, the whole overarching narrative is deeply flawed. And you're like, that's the problem. The problem is the very core of this. The idea of a Justice League movie is great. And many of these actors and actresses work, but you need a completely different story to introduce them. I think if you were not going to have the Barry Allen from the CW show, which many people were still watching then, I don't know anyone who is at this point, it wasn't so bad then, but it had been really good early on, and he was the Flash we knew. If you couldn't get him to make an appearance, if you couldn't bring in Green Arrow, cross it over with the Arrowverse characters to make the real Justice League sort of expanded and blend it together, you'd be better off to not use any of those characters, to drop Flash. It may make no sense to not have the Flash in the early Justice League, the beginning Justice League, but it makes more sense than to try to add Cyborg and cut out Green Lantern. You'd have been better off to just add Green Lantern and forget Flash and never put in Cyborg and do it that way. So overall, I'd have to say the biggest problem with it is the script. It's a story. There's a lot of bells and whistles around it that are neat, they're fun, they're enjoyable to watch, and people will throw rotten tomatoes at me. I will probably go and watch the Whedon cut once in a while to enjoy those parts that are enjoyable. But really, it's the fundamental flaw of the whole DC extended universe. For their cinematic universe, they have continually been dropping the ball, honestly, since Brandon Routh was Superman, which there's a few flaws in that movie, but really, that was a great Superman movie. It was positive, it was relatively light, but it was modern enough. We needed something that linked up with that. We needed something. Our Superman, played by Henry Cavill, should have been that Superman instead of getting Man of Steel. Maybe we needed a different Superman movie in the interim to bring it up to Batman v Superman. But tying it in together to that and keeping it more of that tone and writing a script that was actually cohesive. That might have made a lot more sense. Give us an older Luthor, despite the fact that the actor did a fine job. Give us someone that was supposed to be the one from Hackman to, why am I forgetting his name? Kevin Spacey. And to give us a continuity of that and tie it together with, anyway, all of these missed opportunities. And so we end up with a restarted, brand new DC universe that really doesn't pan out narratively, story-wise, milking these characters for no good reason and not really giving us the payoff of a good story. So my hope and prayer is that we get a better Justice League at some point in the future somehow, that the characters aren't allowed to just die like this. We'll see.